All right, hello guys, and welcome back. We are going to be doing lesson 215. So how you get here is when you log in the OLS, if you click on the left-hand side where it says classes underneath your schedule, it'll open up a page with all of your classes. If you'll click on the purple box that says ELA, that'll take you here to my class. And then once you get here, you want to click on content. And we are going to be doing 215, We Love Oysters. As always, we're going to start, we do this learn portion, and we're going to start with lesson introduction. Poems that tell a story. Have you ever heard the well-known holiday poem, The Night Before Christmas? Or how about the poem The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe? These poems are examples of narrative poetry. In this unit, we will be looking at a narrative poem by Lewis Carroll, The Walrus and the Carpenter. A narrative is a kind of writing that tells a story. Slide 2. And of course, we find on slide 2 our student guide, and we always want to open that up. It gives us our lesson objectives, what we're going to be learning. It gives us our materials, and in this case, we have a graphic organizer, so I'll go ahead and download that. Downloads here in the bottom, so I'm going to open that up and click open. And then I want to click this enable editing button so that I can actually type right on the document and put my name there. All right. And we're going to be discussing the genre, which in this case, of course, is going to be a poem. What questions do you have about the text based on the title and the author? So based on the title and the author, The Walrus and the Carpenter, what questions might you have? Sounds like there will be some personification. And what else? And it will be like a fable where animals talk, take on human care. I cannot type today. Human characteristics. Okay. What is the setting? I'm going to say it's probably going to be outside. But this is supposed to be done while we read. So we're going to pause there and wait and fill that part out while we read. So I'm going to put that on my second screen. And then it gives us some vocabulary to go over. Conflict, a clash or struggle between people, ideas, or feelings. Characters can have a conflict within themselves, with another character, with society, or with nature. A narrative is a kind of writing that tells a story. A resolution is the solution or working out of a literary conflict. All right, so that we've gone through that, now we're ready to go back to this tab and continue on to Module 1. Through the Looking Glass. The poem you will read today is found in Carroll's second book of Alice's Adventures, Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There. In Through the Looking Glass, Alice wonders what life is like on the other side of a looking glass, a mirror. Soon, she finds herself on the other side in a world with different rules. The chess pieces she formerly played with are alive. She walks through a garden of talking flowers. Scenes change unexplainably, and conversation no longer applies. Communication conventions no longer apply. The Walrus and the Carpenter is a poem from the 4th chapter of Through the Looking Glass. Slide 2. Today's reading is a narrative poem. What is the best definition of the word narrative? A, poem, B, a story, C, a character, or D, a conflict? All right, we're going to click on your answer, and if you remember, it said it's a story. That is correct. Remember, this is where you want to open up a new Word document. And again, it opened up over here. Pull it over here. If it'll let me pull it over here, here we go. You'll click on a new document. We're going to title this ELA 1, oh, not 1, we're in Unit 2, 2.15. What's the name of this one again? We Love Oysters. Okay, review, something like that. Okay, just title it something. We're going to put number 1 down. We're going to click on the question, right click, copy, and I didn't make that big enough. Hold on, give me just a second here to pull this out again. Okay. I'm going to make this bigger where I can find it next time. Okay, that's made that bigger, and I'm going to scooch it down here. We'll be able to click on it. All right, and then right click, and I want to click this middle one. I want to get rid of that number 2 and put an A colon for the answer. Click on the answer, the correct answer, click copy. Come back here, click on your document, right click, and again, you want to click on that middle clipboard. Then I'm going to put EX for explanation. Click on the explanation, right click on it to copy, then click back on your review document, right click, and hit that middle clipboard. I'm going to backspace out and hit another space and do number 2. So I'm ready for the next question. All right, and I'll just put that off to the side for now. All right, and we are ready to move on to slide 3. A poetic story. Narrative poetry tells a story. It has a sequence of events. Narrative poems usually contain several characters, describe a conflict, which is a clash or struggle between people, ideas, feelings. Characters can have a conflict within themselves, with another character, with society, or with nature. Again, since this was one of the vocabulary terms that you need to know, you might want to copy and paste that into your review document. And end with a resolution. And a resolution is the solution or working out of a literary conflict. Again, you may want to copy and paste that information in your Word document. Because narrative poems tell a story, they are often longer than other poems. And module 2. Think about some other poems we have explored in this unit. 1, do any of the other poems in this unit tell a story? Do you remember any others? Some of the other poems do seem to tell some kind of a story. Think back to The Pasture by Robert Frost. Although the speaker isn't reciting a narrative, he is telling a story. Number 2, can any of the other poems be considered a narrative poetry? A narrative poem must have a defined beginning, middle, and end, as well as a conflict and a resolution. Do any of the other poems in this unit fit those parameters? Think about the poem we just analyzed, Jabberwocky. Although it's a nonsense poem, it has a definite beginning, middle, and end. So there you go. You might want to copy and paste those into your review document. Let's read Lewis Carroll's narrative poem, The Walrus and the Carpenter. As you read, ask yourself questions about the text. Pose questions before and during your first reading, and then check whether you can answer them after your first reading. Now we're going to click on, and this graphic organizer here is what we pulled up before, and I'll move it back into play here in just a second. Click on that to go to the poem, and of course it's going to take you to your main page. So you have to go to Poetry and Persuasion, And since our last one was on page 409, that's what the Jabberwocky was on. I bet it's going to be on four. Oh, look, I like this one. We didn't read all of it. We've missed the second page of the Jabberwocky. I always need to check for that. So 411 is the Walrus and the Carpenter. From the Looking Glass and what Alice found there. Let me go ahead and check and make sure how many pages this one is. Okay, it goes through 412. It even goes through 413. It even goes through 414. See how this is like a story? 415, 416, and it ends on 416. So it's about 4 or 5 pages. Okay, the Walrus and the Carpenter. From Through the Looking Glass and what Alice found there. Let's look at the bottom. Billows are large waves. All right. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright. And this was odd because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. It's very rude of him, she said, to come and spoil the fun. The sea was wet as wet could be, the sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead. There were no birds to fly. All right, let's look at our document. And it's asking about the setting. So yes, it's outside. Specifically, it seems to be at a beach. Who is telling the story? Do we have a narrator or a character? Well, it seems so far that it looks like we just have a narrator. So far, we have not run into any conflicts yet, other than the sea is kind of mad at the sun. Okay, moving on to page 2. The Walrus and the Carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept. Oh, I forgot to look at here. Beseech means to beg or plead. Briny means salty, like from brine, the salty seawater. The Walrus and the Carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. If this were only cleared away, they said, it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose, the Walrus said, that they could get it clear? I doubt it, said the Carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. Oh, oysters, come and walk with us. The Walrus did beseech. A pleasant talk, a pleasant walk along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each. Frothy, foamy, or bubbly. The eldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat. And this was odd because, you know, they hadn't any feet. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4. And thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. Sealing wax. It's a substance used to close or seal something, such as an envelope. We have a picture of the seal and the carpenter and all the oysters that decided to follow them on the beach. The Walrus and the Carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low. And all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. The time has come, the Walrus said, to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings. But wait a bit, the oysters cried, before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath from all of us are fat. No hurry, said the carpenter. They thanked him much for that. A loaf of bread, the walrus said, is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. Now, if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed. But not on us, the oysters cried, turning a little blue. After such kindness, that would be a dismal thing to do. It means especially bad, causing great discouragement or fear. The night is fine, the walrus said. Do you admire the view? It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice. The carpenter said nothing, but cut us another slice. I wish you were not quite so deaf. I've had to ask you twice. Sympathize, to share the feelings or sorrows of others. It seems a shame, the walrus said, to play them such a trick, after we've brought them out so far and made them trot so quick. The carpenter said nothing, but the butter spread too thick. I weep for you, the walrus said. I deeply sympathize. With sobs and tears he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. Oh, oysters, said the carpenter, you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again? But answer came there none, and this was scarcely odd, because they'd eaten every one. Okay, so what conflicts? Man versus man, man versus self. Man, sounds like it was the carpenter and the seal fighting over who was going to eat all the oysters. After learning about the setting, characters, and conflicts, what questions do you have about the story? Describe each character. What are they like? What is the seal like? What is the carpenter like? What are the poor little oysters like? What do you think will happen to the main character? How will she grow or change throughout the story? Name one or two minor characters. Like the oyster that stayed behind. He was pretty wise, I think. What is the main theme or main idea of the text? If you're an oyster, don't go for a walk with a seal and a carpenter on the beach. You might become lunch. All right, let's go back and see what we have on Module 3. After you finished reading, the walrus and the carpenter answer the following questions. What tone do the first three stanzas establish? So if we look here, the first three stanzas, got to go back to page 411. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright. And this was odd because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily because she thought the sun had no business to be there after the day was done. It's very rude of him, she said, to come and spoil the fun. The sea was wet as wet could be. The sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead. There were no birds to fly. All right, so does it establish anger, a tone of anger, mockery, nonsense, or disinterest? Well, again, like many things Lewis Carroll writes, it's nonsense, just like Jabberwocky. So what you're going to do is you're going to bring your document over here again, and you're going to click copy, middle one, paste. Click on the answer, copy. Get rid of that 3, put an A, and right click, paste. And then we're going to put our EX for explanation and copy. Click back on the document, right click and paste. And then backspace, and now you're ready for question 3. All right. Once you have that copied and pasted, you're ready to move on to the next question. The purpose of this poem is to A, amuse, B, inform, C, persuade, or D, explain. Click on your answer. Check your answer. Once you know the correct answer, you're going to copy and paste the question, correct answer, and explanation into your review document. You may pause the video and come back once you've completed that. All right, question 3. The walrus and the carpenter are weeping at the beginning of the poem because A, they have, now this is at the beginning of the poem. Why are they weeping at the beginning of the poem? A, because they've eaten all the oysters. B, there is so much sand. C, they are very hungry. Or D, they are angry at the oldest oyster. Click on your answer. Check your answer. Once you know the correct answer, copy and paste the question, correct answer, and explanation into your review document. Pause the video and come back when you're done. All right, question 4. What can you infer about the oldest oyster? A, he is too tired to leave the oyster bed. B, he is grief-stricken that the other oysters will be eaten. C, he has been tricked before by other creatures. Or D, he knows what the walrus and carpenter are planning. Click on your answer. Check your answer. Once you know the correct answer, copy and paste the question, correct answer, and explanation into your review document. Pause the video and come back when you're done. Last question. Which statement best describes the way the walrus and carpenter speak? A, they are both very friendly. B, the walrus is cheerful, the carpenter is gruff. C, they speak only about food. Or D, the walrus wants to devour the oysters, but the carpenter defends them. Click on your answer, check your answer. Once you know the correct answer, copy and paste the question, correct answer, and explanation into your review document. Pause the video, come back when that's done. All right, now that you've got all those questions copied and pasted and correct answers into your review document, we are ready for module 4. Find how Carroll uses one word or phrase to mean 2 different things. Lewis Carroll's nonsense continues in this poem. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat. And this was odd because, they hadn't any feet. Carroll's use of language shows how the unsuspecting oysters are the perfect snack for the walrus and the carpenter. You might want to copy and paste this whole thing into your review document. Once you've done that, click on to the next slide. Lewis Carroll's nonsense continues in this poem. But for the young, all right, we look at this word treat. Little do the oysters know that they are an edible treat for the walrus and the carpenter, but there's a little bit of foreshadowing there. That word treat. Again, you might want to copy and paste that into your review document. Coats were brushed, their faces washed, were clean and neat. The oysters are also cleaned so they can be eaten. Ooh. Again, you might want to copy and paste that in there. Once you got that, we'll move on to slide 2. The oysters. The oysters want to take a break explaining, for some of us, are out of breath, and all of us are fat. The oysters mean that they are tired because they are overweight. What does their fitness mean to the walrus and the carpenter? The oyster's fatness will make them delicious. They are sealing their fate by proclaiming their fatness. Consider this passage. The walrus and the carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently below. Why is it convenient for them to be below? They are closer to the oysters than to the oysters they want to eat. This makes it easier for them to gobble up their victims. Slide number 3. The Oysters is a narrative. It tells a story. What is the main conflict in this poem? A, the walrus and the carpenter disagree about whether or not to eat the oysters. B, the walrus and the carpenter take unsuspecting oysters for a walk on the beach intending to eat them. C, the oldest oyster does not want to join them on the walk. Or D, the creatures cannot find anything to discuss on their walk. Click on your answer. Check it. Once you know the correct answer, copy and paste the question, correct answer, and explanation into your review document. Pause the video. Once you've done that, come back and we'll continue on. All right, now that that's done, let's go to slide 4. Identify the resolution. How is the conflict resolved? A, the walrus agrees to do what the carpenter suggests. B, the walrus and the carpenter eat all the oysters. C, the oldest oyster remains behind. Or D, the creatures agree not to have any conversation on their walk. Click on your answer, check your answer. Once you know the correct answer, copy and paste the question, correct answer, and explanation into your review document. Pause the video and come back when you're done. All right, now that that's done, moving on to slide 5. A loaf of bread, the walrus said, is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar, besides, are very good indeed. Now, if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed. Can you find the words that indicate the walrus plans to eat the oysters? A loaf of bread, I guess an oyster sandwich. Pepper and vinegar. Pepper and vinegar are often known to go well on seasoning oysters. And of course, the word feed. Oysters aren't going to be feeding. They're going to feed the walrus and the carpenter. All right. You might want to copy and paste that into your document, especially if you didn't find them. Number 6. When the oyster finds out what the walrus and the carpenters have planned, they are upset. After such kindness, that would be a dismal thing to do, the walrus responds. The night is fine, the walrus said. Do you admire the view? Consider the following lines. A loaf of bread, the walrus said, is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. Now, if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed. Why does the walrus say the above lines? A, he has just noticed a beautiful sight. B, the walrus is shy because the oysters call him kind. C, he wants to convince them that it's the kind of night for eating oysters. Or D, he's changing the subject to distract the oysters. Click on your answer. Check your answer. Once you know the correct answer, copy and paste the question, correct answer, and explanation into your review document. Once you've got that, you're ready to move forward to Module 5. Think about it. After reading the poem, do you feel that you can picture the characters and the events of this story? Think about the following questions. Number 1, consider all the walrus's words and his behavior. How would you describe him? I weep for you, the walrus said. I deeply sympathize. With sobs and tears, he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. Based on this, how do you imagine the walrus? Number 2, what is the tone of this poem? Where do you see evidence of this in the text? Remember that tone is the author's feelings toward the subject. Review this passage from the poem. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright. And this was odd because it was the middle of the night. How do you think the author sets the tone of the poem? Number 3, this poem is full of humorous nonsense that makes readers laugh. Does it evoke any other feelings? Why or why not? When you think about the feelings this poem evokes, identify the tone of the individual stanzas. For example, the eldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head. What kind of feeling does this stanza evoke? Is it humorous or something else? You may want to copy and paste those into your review document. If so, pause the video and come back when you're finished. Slide 2. Let's examine some stanzas from The Walrus and the Carpenter. Oh, oysters, come and walk with us, the walrus did beseech. A pleasant talk, a pleasant walk along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each. Why do the walrus and Carpenter want to be able to keep a hand on each oyster? Dun, dun, dun. The eldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. These lines set up the rest of the events. You have to ask yourself what the eldest oyster knows. The structure of The Walrus and the Carpenter is a narrative poem, 18 stanzas long. Remember that a narrative poem is one that tells a story. Which events in the story are happening during these stanzas? This part of the poem moves the events forward. The walrus and the carpenter are talking to the oyster, asking them to go for a walk. Examine the reaction of the eldest oyster. What does he know that the little oysters don't? They're not coming back. Perhaps at one point in time, the eldest oyster was also offered to go for a walk. Maybe he wasn't feeling well or he just didn't want to go, but he stayed behind. And his siblings went off with the walrus and the carpenter, never to return. So he doesn't trust them now. The rhyming pattern of each stanza is A, B, C, B, D, B. So let's look at this. Carpenter is always going to be A. The first one's always A. Does hand rhyme with carpenter? No, so hand's going to be B. C. C doesn't rhyme with carpenter or hand, so it's going to be C. How funny. Sand doesn't rhyme with carpenter, but it does rhyme with hand, so that's going to be B. A, B, C, B. All right. Away. Away doesn't rhyme with carpenter, hand, sea, or sand. So it's going to be D. And then grand rhymes with hand and sand, so it's going to be B again. So that's where we get the rhyme scheme of A, B, C, D, B, D, B. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose the walrus said that they could get it clear? I doubt it, said the carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. All right, so we got mops. Again, we start off with A. Year is B, doesn't rhyme with mops. Said doesn't rhyme with mops or year, so it's C. Clear rhymes with year, so we're back to B. Carpenter doesn't rhyme with mops, year, or said, or clear, so it's going to be D. And then tier rhymes with year and clear, so it's going to be B also. So A, B, C, B, D, B. How do you think the structure of this poem affects its meaning? We know from earlier analysis that this is a humorous poem. Think about how the rhyme scheme contributes to the humor in the poem. Playing with language. Like many poets, Lewis Carroll often uses figurative language to help define and characterize his poems. Let's examine some of the figurative devices he uses in The Walrus and the Carpenter. Read the line from The Walrus and the Carpenter. Which figurative language device is Lewis Carroll using? The sun was shining, excuse me, the sun was shining on the sea. Is that an example of hyperbole, alliteration, or symbolism? Click on your answer. Check your answer. Once you know the correct answer, copy and paste the question, correct answer, and explanation into your review document. Pause the video and come back when you're done. All right, now that you are back, let's go to the next question. Which one of the choices does not represent the use of personification in The Walrus and the Carpenter? Okay, now that you have got that copied and pasted into your review document, we're going to move forward to the last question. Which passage from The Walrus and the Carpenter illustrates the use of a simile? A, the moon was shining sulkily. B, the sands were dry as dry. C, oh, oysters, come and walk with us. Click on your answer. Check your answer. Once you know the correct answer, copy and paste the question, correct answer, and explanation into your review document. Pause the video until you have this done. Come back. All right, now that you have all three of those questions into your review document, you're ready to scroll back up to the top and move on to Module 6. Check your knowledge. Lewis Carroll is perhaps the best known for his work in Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. Within those works, he not only created an inventive story, but also wrote some fascinating poems. Many of Carroll's poems are considered nonsense poems because they have fantastic events and made up language. However, they are still excellent poems featuring many of the poetic techniques we have been studying. Answer the following questions to check your knowledge. 1. What is a rhyme scheme in a poem? The rhyme scheme refers to the pattern of the rhyming words in the poem. If you need to, go back and review how we found the rhyme scheme for The Walrus and the Carpenter. Number 2, how does the structure of The Walrus and the Carpenter contribute to its meaning? The structure of the poem is an important element in both the rhythm and the rhyme scheme of the poem. Think about how Carroll's use of rhyme stanzas enhances the way you read the poem. You might want to copy and paste those two questions into your review document and their answers. Before you complete the quiz, review your work so far and make sure you've completed all activities. This is also your chance to review. So again, pull up, be sure you have the poem pulled up, be sure you have that graphic organizer filled out and pulled up, and your review document. Once you have all that and you've looked over it and you've got everything exactly the way you want it, then you're ready to move on to the assessment. Do not click on this until you're ready to take the quiz. You'll have 3 chances to make 80 or better. If you're having trouble passing it before you take the last one, come see me in open office or email me and let me know you'd like for us to get together and go over it. All right. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you found this video helpful. And I will see y'all next time. Bye.